it's a pleasure for me to join this platform of Atma Foundation this afternoon and to be part of your 3 to 4 days webinars or this series of webinars. When I was going through your literature and I read that Atma Foundation, which is a voluntary organization based in Kerala, is doing a lot in the area of empowering individuals and families to live a happier and healthier life, engage in community development, and has been doing a lot in terms of Gurukulam Girls Home, Railway Child Help Desk as Thrissur Railway Station, Counseling Center, Child and Adolescent Development Center, Kalashetram, Digital and Financial Empowerment Center, Yogapeetham, and Uyare. I mean, all these things definitely convince me that when it comes to doing something, uh, the word always remains infinite or limitless. The limits could only be attributed to the one who is intending to do something for the cause, the social cause, or the global cause, or the national cause. I remember when Vinodji talked to me about this series, in fact, and he was saying that I must come and join and try to share my views with the audience on this platform, which I am told runs into sometimes a few thousands also. Uh, so, despite time constraints, for the simple reason that this calendar year is about to end, I thought that it would be uh, equally good for me and maybe gainful for me to be part of this exercise and talk about my important concerns, in fact, from this platform. I'm told that number of social work graduates, postgraduate, research scholars, faculty, they have joined this webinar series and they are participating in it as part of the audience and maybe as participants during interactions also. Uh, since the broad topic that is before us is perspectives 2020, it gives an impression that how should one be taking this year 2020. Before I start, let me clarify this position very well, that these perspectives definitely they are always individual specific. They relate to the priorities of the individuals, and definitely one who is more interested in global developments will be concentrating more on global developments. One who is more interested in talking about the developments at the national level during the year would be concentrating much on that. Uh, I would largely be concentrating on the national developments or the perspectives that have emerged during 2020 and why those perspectives have emerged and what significance do they hold for days to come, in fact. Uh, we all know that this 2020 at global level and by many at national level also is being termed to be a year that most of the people would like to forget. And before I forget paying my sincere condolences to the bereaved family of Sukhda Kumari ji, let me do this duty and offer my prayers to the noble departed soul. So we all know this year is largely, and maybe in history also, for several years to come, maybe a century or two to come, will be discussed in respect of a pandemic which is being termed as COVID-19. We all know number of pandemics all over the world have taken place during last 100 years. But as far as India is concerned, we recall the pandemic that took place in 1919, 1920. And thereafter, India is witnessing another pandemic of such magnitude which we could not have imagined about even. Over last 100 years, most of us were unaware about any pandemic of such magnitude. We know on January 30th, 2020, the first case in Kerala state, where from this program is being aired, witnessed the first case of COVID-19 infection in the country. And this is how we begin. And I was reading some statistics. Where are we today in respect of COVID-19 as on date? So more than 79 million people all over the world have suffered from the disease. And the toll in terms of death has been as high as 1.7 million. Of course, in terms of death toll, in terms of total number of sufferers, we are said to be number 2 in the world after United States. But in terms of death toll, we are, in terms of gross tally, we are at number 3. But when we talk about the death rate, that is the rate of people dying of the disease in proportion to the people who got infected by this COVID-19. So our percentage is definitely, as compared to most of the countries in the world, including the developed countries, our rate is far, far below. So there might be different ways to look at the situation. I said gross number is one situation, total number of deaths is another situation, and death rate could be another yardstick to measure the magnitude of the problem or the severity of the problem in our case. Since the audience is constituted by the social work graduates or undergraduates or postgraduates or researchers and the teaching fraternity also. So which is why I would be underlining few issues when I intend to talk about those. In fact, in the present world, the boundaries, the disciplinary boundaries are being broken to a great extent, and as a result of that, everything which is important definitely invites be the attention and maybe work, the scholarly work or maybe the real life work from people who are working in different domains. So I'm trying to emphasize the interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity dimensions at which or for which the world has definitely in the recent past broken the disciplinary boundaries. We also know the US President Donald Trump visited India. All of us remember Namaste India campaign, which happened in February 2020. Then we had in March a Janta curfew, which took place on 22nd March, and it was followed by the Prime Minister's announcement of lockdown for 21 days, starting from the midnight of 24th or 25th March. And then at each successive stage, this lockdown was extended and the protocols to follow were differing from the previous one. Sometimes there was little hardening in terms of protocols, and there was sometimes, some other times, little softening of those protocols. But protocols continued to be there. Lockdown, in one way or the other, continued to be there. So the debate in the whole world became the very life or the very continuity of the life and the choice between life and the health was perhaps one of the most debatable issues before the world. Which one should they be opting for? We know it that many countries in the world opted for continuance with a normal life and venturing to have a greater extent of infection, disease, and definitely uh, somewhere taking up this challenge of the disease and also testing it against the health infrastructure and the health system in a country, but not to go about the difficult option of economic lockdown, making gross domestic product or production in the country to suffer as a result of that. So the choices were differing between the countries. We know that many countries in Europe and America, United States, they went for slightly softer option in terms of lockdown, whereas India and many more countries, despite being developing countries or emerging economies, went for little harder option in terms of lockdown. So many people started to say at the global level that normal or normalcy has started to differ from what we have experienced in the past. And so most of the world was talking about a new normal. When we were talking about a new normal, in the same breath, we were talking about returning to the normal that existed in the past. Second important development which took place, and I'll come down to COVID-19 a little later. Let me spell out first the issues on which I'm going to have a little more focus. And maybe I'll be spending 5 to 6 minutes on each of these issues after I list those issues before this audience. Another issue that emerged before the entire country and which was very interesting for the rest of the world was we know for last 20-25 years India and China, our engagement in terms of trade, in terms of investment, in terms of uh, exchange, academic exchanges also, they were intensifying. But we had to witness skirmishes in May, in the month of May 2020, and cross-border clashes as Nathula crossing in Ladakh region. We all remember that in June, 20 soldiers they lost their lives in these skirmishes in Galwan Valley also, which again is there in Ladakh. I went through the record of the events, which the significant events which took place in 2020, and I noticed that number of the leaders belonging to terrorist outfits working cross border in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, they were also killed during this period of time. Another interesting thing which I was sharing with the organizers, Shri Suresh and Shri Vinod, in the beginning, I did notice that there was a cyclone called Amphan in May, which hit the eastern part of the country and many southeastern states of the country. Then there was another cyclone in June, Nisarg, which hit the west coast of the country. And then we remember that there were few floods also, earthquake of the magnitude of 4.7 on Richter scale. It hit Kargil in July. There were several floods in Brahmaputra Valley and landslides in Munnar in Kerala also, where a number of people again lost their lives. What I'm trying to emphasize is that the human beings, the policy makers, the lawmakers, the decision makers in different parts of the world were doing their work, and the nature was doing its own work during the year. And when we were faced with such natural calamities like cyclones, earthquakes, floods, of course, the entire disaster management system in our country and wherever it took place in the world also, their agencies, the related agencies, including uh, district administrations, law, law machinery, and also since many of you are into community services, so those who are involved in community services, they were doing their own works in mitigating the effects of such disasters, in fact, on human life, on the health and the happy living of the human beings. Another interesting thing which took place and which is uh, having an impact even these days on the national life, especially the life in the northern part of the country, which connects Delhi with the rest of the northern India. I'm making a reference to the farmers' stir or agitation which is going on. So there was a promulgation of three ordinances related to agriculture, uh, which were later passed as act in the month of September. So this promulgation took place sometimes in June, July, and they were translated into act by the parliament of the country sometimes in September. Another interesting event that took place and that became the talk of the nation was finding Sushant Singh Rajput as dead in June in his flat in Mumbai. The of course uh, reports from AIMS etc. They have found him to have committed suicide. There were different versions about that, and of course, in examination of why it may have happened and how it happened, we know that different agencies are reaching somewhere a finding that there has been immense drug abuse, peddling in Mumbai, and maybe it involves to a large extent the film industry of the country also. Interestingly, we India has always been talking about, and since I just talked about India-China rift also, especially in Ladakh region, which is a very significant region for both the countries. So uh, we all know that there was historically a time that India was being offered to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council, but India declined to take that position in favor of China. And now has come a time that again India aspires to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. But this year, India got elected by a thumping majority to be one of the members which is picked up or which is elected for a term of 2 years. I was talking about India China matters. So I said it earlier that India and China were engaging in trade, investment, even exchanges of academics and artists on a very large basis. Besides that, India and China were also engaging on digital basis also. In terms of technology also, we know a lot of communication related technology in India has definitely a very big impact of China. And many Chinese companies have been uh, providing that technology. They have been exporting technology led products to India also. And more than that, there are a number of applications which were being used in India and they became very popular. I'm making a reference to TikTok, Cam Scanner, Share, and as a result of, as I said, rift, skirmishes, expansionism of China, India definitely went to the extent of banning some of very popular Chinese applications in the country. And from there also emerged a new concept which was talked about by none other than the Prime Minister of the country, Shri Narendra Modi, that which way in the middle of this crisis which we were faced with during COVID-19 situation, which way should India go and what should be our model of development in days to come. Very interestingly, I said that, and I'll come to little crucial aspect which can be a bit philosophical and which can be a bit theoretical also in explanation little afterwards. In the month of July, towards 29 July, I think that new education policy or new national education policy 2020 was approved by the cabinet of the country. So if I concentrate and on these issues, I think each issue would definitely need a little justification. And within the broad issue, I would like to underline the smaller issues within a big major or big, very crucial issue. I start with COVID-19 and the important concerns related to COVID-19. So, as I said, over last 100 years or 98 to 99 years, people had forgotten, in India at least, about what are pandemics, do they actually happen or not. Even developed countries had a feeling somewhere that given that they have one of the best infrastructures, health infrastructures in the world, so they could be pretty sure that everything is fine with them and there are no challenges in terms of health or whatever latest exists in the world in terms of researches, infrastructures, they have it. And so uh, there are no real challenges, in fact, which they might be faced with. But this pandemic has definitely made us rethink about our degree of satisfaction and to a large extent contentment in terms of having great infrastructures of health, and even sometimes made us little uh, skeptical about the new developments and how these new developments in the area of health could have definitely given an assurance of a healthy living to a common man, whether in United States or Europe or India or any developing country or even a lesser developed country. So these are all issues of great concern. We know all institutions, whether World Bank or IMF or Asian Development Bank or uh, institutions like WTO or any big think tank of the world like Standard and Poor, all were busy, or or any other raters, sovereign, I mean, apart from sovereign rating agencies, the private rating agencies, the world also, they, Goldman Sachs, for example, they were all busy in estimating that what would be the economic impact of COVID-19. There is no top level institution of the world, Harvard, MIT. In India also, if you read about the papers which appear before us on COVID-19 situation, most of them were doing some or the other kind of modeling that how many people at global level or in relation to our own country are going to finally suffer. When would this crisis be over? When would we have the beginning of the curve flattening? And then there were also debates on what kind of recovery, whether it is going to be a V-shaped recovery, is it going to be a W-shaped recovery, or is it going to be a L-shaped trap like a situation? So there were papers, there were discussions on that, and the whole world, whether international institutions or private international agencies which have a very high reputation also, they were all busy in estimating the the extent of loss at the global and at a particular economy level. There is no doubt the fact all this situation, we know in the initial period of 3 months up to March 2020, starting from January to March 2020, the loss in global trade was more than 60 to 65%. Uh, of course, new partnerships were emerging, or people were discussing though. We remember, uh, I mean, many countries which were importing from China or which were exporting to China to some extent, they were starting to find new alternatives, new partners at the global level in terms of trade. And it's a given principle that when our own economic condition is not very good, then definitely we would like to first set our own house in order, then invest elsewhere in the world. And given that position, since recession was continuing the world for last many years, so the whole world was busy in setting its own house in the order, and as a result of that, international investments were declining. And during this period itself, uh, a new term which emerged for our neighbor like China was that, uh, again, none other than the prime minister of the country talked about a phenomenon which China is said to have believed in for several centuries altogether, uh, which is about expansionism. It is not only expansion of the size of an economy, but also expansion of geographical size, expansion of geographical access to the resources, which are very vital and crucial for an economy. I'm making a reference to South China Sea and related geographical and economic issues, particularly pertaining to the resources. The whole world was also talking about disruption of global supply chain. We know in the past 20-25 years, as a result of a greater degree of internationalization, the countries have definitely connected with each other to a very large extent. And I remember one text also where it is said that the world is like this today, that something is produced somewhere, but raw materials are imported from somewhere else. The accounting is done in some other country, the supplies are done from some other country, and the payments are received through multiple channels. So, right now, we are in that state of the world. And of course, as a result of uh, stoppage in flights as a result of COVID 19, and of course, lockdowns, very aggressive lockdowns. There was a disruption of not only supply chains within the economies, but there was a almost total disruption of supply chain uh, in the world. I've already talked about the implications of this problem and tried to connect it with the situation of recession which was continuing since 2007-8, and the trade recession was definitely having an impact on the investment situation in the world also. And this is why you could recall when 4 years back Trump won election in United States, one of the basic agenda that he was propagating and on the basis of which he finally won the election in the United States was the issue of immigration. Whether you want to have an easy visa policy or you want to have little a strict visa policy, and this is why a number of issues, including the issues pertaining to easy immigration of the Indian uh, technologists in the United States, those issues were coming up. Another interesting thing which has been talked about at the global level is what kind of statistics do we have? Do we have real data available with us or not? If we have big data in one way or the other, are we able to analyze that data fully? Are we able to make use of that data? Remember the kind of issues that have emerged during this crisis related to hospitals, health workers, infrastructural facilities. Even on number of occasions, we were talking about when we were talking about isolation of the people, we were also talking about not only beds, but we were also talking about toilet facilities, whether these are available where people are to be isolated. And of course, law and order machinery uh, and health workers or the people who were supporting or who were helping the health workers or pandemic warrior, which became a very popular term also. So all those issues were emerging. And within those issues, another issue that gained a lot of importance or significance was the issue of reverse migration. That nearly 50 million or 60 million people uh, reversely migrated to the places of their origin or the places where from they had migrated to the bigger towns. Many people wrote about it, number of papers, number of articles appeared in this respect, and the scores of people analyzed the whole situation. With their own perspective, some people emphasize economic reasons to be having primacy in this reverse migration. Some other people were raising psychological issues. Some more people raised the issues pertaining to the failure of assurance of providing health services in crucial hours to those who had migrated to the bigger towns. There were also psychological, anxiety related, and maybe a serious amount of insecurity related issues which figured in the minds of migrants. So the whole spectrum of issues when it is taken into account, it was much bigger than the mere issue of economy, survival, and earning. and it definitely needs to be analyzed in all those perspective, and then only a holistic or a more integrated approach in respect of migration could be considered. And it was this period when Prime Minister of the country talked about Atmanirbhar Bharat also, that is self-reliant India. Many people thought that the whole world is passing through pandemic and Prime Minister is talking about self-reliant India. A number of issues emerged out of it. Does it mean that isolating India from the rest of the world? Does it mean or imply putting the economy of the country in reverse gear in respect of internationalization or globalization or global engagements? Does it mean showing a back to the new international economic order which is being talked about? But fact of the matter is that a crisis situation definitely gives us ample reasons to look afresh at our approach that we may have pursued so far in terms of its robustness, its own health, and maybe its own strength to help us face those challenges. And all of us could recall, those of us who have read Gandhian concept of self-reliant villages also, we could recall. Gandhiji throughout his life was talking about it, that every unit, as far as possible, has to be self-reliant, which is why he was always talking up, or he was always advocating bottom-up approach. The same thing definitely was reflected in the articulation of the Prime Minister when he said self-reliant India. Perhaps we were starting to rethink the kind of development model that we have pursued, or maybe we have to some extent copied without making it equally grounded for our remote and rural areas and maybe far-flung areas. I think the benefit of the development did not reach the bottommost people, the people situated in the remote areas of the country, and also people based in the villages of the country. So, new paradigm of development. I could recall over last 20-25 years, as far as development paradigms are concerned, number of changes have already taken place at the global level, and number of changes are also taking place at the national level. And this is what definitely compelled the Prime Minister of the country to say that we, if we want to go global, we have to understand, appreciate, and upscale the local level of capacities, intelligence, endowment, and maybe if there are some problems, then those problems initially they need to be considered uh, to be solved with local resources, and if need be, and they can be better resolved with the internationally or nationally established practices, then we can definitely look for those practices. So, in no way, this entire paradigm of self-reliant India, I said, the crisis periods sometimes are big eye openers also. So they compelled us that why certain areas were going, why did we have Eiffel Towers of development over last 50 to 60 years, and why development could not be evenly distributed over the big cities, relatively small cities, the and the remote and the rural areas of the country. And maybe on number of occasions it was noticed, and it can be noticed, that they do have and they do offer big prospects of development, but those prospects were not encouraged to take shape. And this is why the whole idea of self reliant India gained uh, some momentum in the expression of the Prime Minister. And we know Indian paradigm of development has always been about holistic development, about integrated development, a development which is inclusive, sustainable, integrative, and definitely gives a scope for further improvement and developments. And it in no way relates to isolating the country from the international or global developments. Because self reliance means that if we can contribute in the process to a greater extent, we must. And if we can pay for our imports through our exports, we must definitely explore those opportunities. So it was with these things in mind that all these things were being talked about. Another interesting development which came into focus was farm laws. Three laws, as I said, they they came, they were amended to some extent, and they finally took the shape of three different acts, and they jointly are being termed as the reforms in agriculture or reforms in farm laws. And they include Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Production and Facilitation Act 2020, Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act and Essential Commodities Act amendment to that. The basic spirit of all these laws is to definitely give farmers an opportunity to sell their surplus wherever they might get a better price. And also uh, increase the number of the the agencies which could buy farmers produce, and thus also encourage the maintaining of the buffer stocks or surplus stocks, and putting no conditions of maximum limits on those stocks, and hence somehow encouraging the warehousing industry, the refrigeration, refrigerated warehouses, in fact. And this is why some changes or some amendments were made in Essential Commodities Act also. We know the agitation of the farmers in the country is still going on. They have some issues related to different, there might be state specific issues also. And they are expecting uh, the announcement. Initially they wanted government to assure them that minimum support prices will be maintained in all cases, and that government has already assured them about. So I think at global level, if we, those of us who go through the debates, those of us who might have gone through the papers which were published about agricultural reforms, and those who are aware about the agenda of doubling farmers' income in 4 to 5 years' time, we are aware about this fact that many of these reforms have been, in fact, found to be appropriate by many researchers in the country. And I'm very hopeful that the smaller issues which are being raised can be taken care of by the government. And finally, the goodwill is also expected to prevail in the economy. Uh, Finally, uh, the new international economic order, a good part of new economic order pertains to, uh, I think, new kind of developments. All of us may have noticed that new relationship between India, United States, Israel, Australia, Japan, South Korea seem to be emerging during this period. And definitely there is uh, a good understanding that due to aggressive expansionism, I think China seems to be losing some ground at the international level. And that is why the new groupings or new relationship or new economic, new uh, international economic order is expected to emerge. And it is emerging, especially when many international institutions are being seen not to be performing. I'm making a reference to WTO, are considered to be not performing at the desired level. And another interesting thing which has emerged during this period, as I said in the beginning also, is the approval in July by Cabinet of the new National Education Policy 2020, which lays its focus on two important aspects, one being transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, all encompassing researches, introducing flexibility in education by opening up various points of entry and various points of exit also, and yet making all those points of exit also meaningful to a large extent that people can take away their degrees, diploma, certificates, whatever. And not only that, to encourage students to stay within the country, and even if they under compelling circumstances have to migrate from the other parts of the world and come back to their own nation, they must be able to complete their degree, and so credit transfer system. And I'm particularly very happy that this nation has come to a realization that research, we have been talking about India becoming a knowledge creation leader or one of the leaders in the world. So it is high time that we appreciate the importance of knowledge creation through researches, publications, and also when we put those researches and publications into day to day conveniences in improvement as tools of improvement in our life, then they have to definitely go through the process of innovations. So, all these things have found their place in new education policy. I'm very, very hopeful that our new approach toward the things, our new vision about the thing is definitely and finally going to help the nation to resolve its problem. As I have said in the beginning, since I'm addressing this audience of social uh, workers, in fact, so I think number of issues, the problems which are there before the nation in terms of water, climate change, population dynamics, artificial intelligence, big data analysis, violence, health, infrastructure, I think they would definitely give opportunities to all of us to understand these issues much better. And maybe in best possible way, we can resolve these issues, then maybe opportunities to in a productive, gainful, and also employment oriented manner to resolve some of these problems in days to come. With these words, I would like to thank once again the organizers of this event to give me this, who have given me this opportunity to join on this occasion with you and share my views. So, namaskar and thank you very much.